I didn't know that a quiet Sunday brunch, set for 11 in the morning, would turn into the most humiliating moment of my life. And I didn't know that the man I loved would choose that moment, with both our families watching, to tell me I was no longer enough. The restaurant was warm and bright, the kind of upscale place meant for happy milestones. Our parents were laughing, catching up after months of not seeing each other. His cousins were teasing him. His friends were sitting a little too close together, whispering and smiling like they were in on something I wasn't. I stood there, steadying my breath, my hand brushing against the small ring box tucked safely inside my purse. My heart was racing, but it was the kind of nervous excitement I had imagined so many times before. When I stood up, the room slowly quieted. I could feel every pair of eyes on me. My mother was already smiling, her eyes glossy. His father looked proud. I looked at him, waiting for him to smile back at me, to give me that reassuring look that said we were in this together. But he wasn't smiling. He was staring down at his plate, jaw tight, hands clenched like he was bracing himself. I had barely opened my mouth when he cut me off. His voice was calm, detached, almost bored. He said he knew what I was about to do, and that he needed to stop me before I embarrassed myself. The silence that followed was suffocating. I felt it press against my chest, making it hard to breathe. Then he said it. He didn't want to marry me. He deserved someone better, someone with ambition, someone who was going somewhere. He said I was comfortable, and that comfortable wasn't enough for him. The words landed one by one, each one sharper than the last. I saw his friends smirking, one of them whispering something that made the others struggle not to laugh. His cousins looked satisfied, like this was a performance they had been waiting to see. 3 years collapsed in front of me in a matter of seconds. 3 years of planning, trusting, believing in a future that apparently only existed in my head. I stood there, frozen, the ring still hidden in my purse, my dignity hanging by a thread. I should have sat down. I should have walked away quietly, but something inside me broke, and in that moment, I knew I would not leave that room ashamed. Not after everything I had given. Before that Sunday, before the silence and the stares and the words that cut deeper than anything I had ever heard, my life with him felt steady. I was 33, old enough to know myself, old enough to understand what I wanted and what I was willing to give. I wasn't chasing a fantasy or a fairy tale. I wanted partnership. I wanted stability. I wanted a future built on trust and mutual respect. And for 3 years, I truly believed that was what we were building together. We met through mutual friends at a small gathering that neither of us had planned to attend for long. I remember thinking he felt easy to talk to, not loud or flashy, but confident in a quiet way that made me feel seen. He asked about my work and actually listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't try to impress me with exaggerated stories. When he asked for my number at the end of the night, it felt natural, like something that was already meant to happen. Our relationship grew gradually, the way healthy relationships are supposed to. We spent our first year learning each other's rhythms. Weeknight dinners turned into shared routines. Lazy Sundays became our thing. We talked about our families, our childhoods, the mistakes we had made before we met each other. He told me he admired how grounded I was, how I didn't need chaos to feel alive. I told him I appreciated his ambition, the way he talked about wanting more out of life without tearing down what he already had. He introduced me to his family early, and that felt significant to me. His mother welcomed me with warmth, inviting me to dinners, checking in on me, making space for me like I belonged there. His father was quieter but kind, the type of man who showed approval through actions rather than words. I made an effort with them because I cared about him and because I believed that loving someone also meant respecting where they came from. I showed up for birthdays, holidays, family gatherings, learning how to fit into their world without losing myself. By the second year, conversations about marriage stopped feeling hypothetical. We talked about it openly, not in a rushed way, but in a way that felt thoughtful and intentional. We looked at rings together once, then again months later, laughing about styles and prices, imagining what felt right. We talked about venues, about whether we wanted something small or something traditional. He said he wasn't in a rush, but that he was sure about me. I trusted that. I wasn't pressuring him. I believed in timing. Somewhere in the last 2 months, things began to shift. Though I didn't want to admit it at the time, he became more distant, more distracted. He spent more time with his friends and less time with me. When we were together, his phone was always in his hand, lighting up with messages he didn't explain. When I asked if something was wrong, he blamed stress, long hours, exhaustion. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. I told myself relationships go through phases, that love means patience. I didn't realize then that I was slowly teaching myself to ignore the small warnings my body was giving me. I didn't know that while I was planning a future, he was already pulling away from it. And I had no idea that the brunch I thought would mark a new beginning was actually the end that had been forming quietly for weeks. After that brunch ended in my mind before it ever happened in real life, I began replaying the weeks leading up to it with a clarity I hadn't allowed myself before. At the time, everything felt explainable. Stress, work, fatigue. Those were the words I kept using to protect the version of him I still wanted to believe in. But once the shock wore off, the small moments started lining up, and together they formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. He wasn't cruel in those weeks. That was the most confusing part. He was distant in a quiet, almost polite way, like someone already halfway out the door, but too uncomfortable to announce it. He stopped asking about my day with genuine interest. Our conversations became shorter, functional, filled with pauses where laughter used to be. When I reached for his hand, he didn't pull away, but he didn't squeeze back either. It felt like holding on to someone who was slowly turning into a stranger. His phone became an extension of him. It was always face down on the table, always within reach. Messages came in late at night, early in the morning. When I asked who it was, he would shrug and say work, or friends, or nothing important. His tone was casual, almost convincing. I told myself I was being paranoid, that insecurity would only poison what we had. I didn't want to be that woman, the one who questions everything and ruins her own relationship with doubt. His friends were suddenly everywhere. Group dinners I wasn't invited to, last-minute plans that didn't include me. When I did see them, the energy felt different. Conversations would pause when I walked into the room. Inside jokes I wasn't part of. Side glances that made my skin prickle, even though I couldn't explain why. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was imagining things, that not everything revolves around me. Even his family felt subtly changed. His mother was still kind, but more careful, like she was choosing her words more deliberately. His father seemed quieter around me, less warm than before. I wondered if I had done something wrong without realizing it, if I had crossed an invisible line. The idea that he might be unhappy with me didn't scare me as much as the thought that everyone else seemed to know something I didn't. There were moments when I almost asked him directly if he still wanted the same future we had talked about. The words sat on my tongue more than once, but every time I hesitated. I didn't want to sound needy. I didn't want to force a conversation he might not be ready for. I convinced myself that love meant giving space, trusting that he would come back to me when whatever he was dealing with passed. Looking back now, I understand that the heaviness I felt wasn't anxiety. It was intuition. Something inside me knew that the ground beneath our relationship was already cracking. I just didn't know how deep the fracture was or how violently it was about to break open in front of everyone I cared about. Sunday morning arrived with a strange mix of excitement and unease sitting in my chest. I woke up earlier than usual, staring at the ceiling for a long moment before getting out of bed, telling myself to breathe, to calm down, to trust what I had built. I reminded myself that nerves were normal, that big moments always come with fear, and that fear didn't mean something was wrong. I got dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that made me feel confident without trying too hard. I checked my purse twice to make sure the ring box was still there, my fingers lingering on it for a second longer than necessary, like touching it might steady me. The brunch was scheduled for 11, but by the time we arrived, people were already gathering, hugging, laughing, greeting each other like this was a reunion rather than a turning point. The restaurant had reserved a private room just for us, elegant and warm, sunlight filtering through tall windows. Mimosas were poured, plates were filled, conversations overlapped in that comfortable, noisy way families have when they don't see each other often enough. I watched our parents reconnect, watched my mother smile, like she already knew what was coming, and felt a surge of emotion rise in my throat. He sat across from me, quiet, polite, distant. He barely touched his food. I asked if he was okay. And he nodded without meeting my eyes. I told myself he was nervous too. I told myself this was just part of the moment. I didn't know then that he wasn't anxious about the future. He was preparing to destroy it. By 11:45, the plates were mostly empty and the mood was light. Someone made a joke. Laughter filled the room. I took that as my cue. My heart started pounding as I pushed my chair back and stood up, my legs trembling just enough to remind me how much this mattered. I cleared my throat, my voice catching slightly as I asked for everyone's attention. The room slowly quieted, faces turning toward me with expectant smiles. I looked at him, searching his face for reassurance, for anything familiar. He didn't look back. His eyes were fixed on his plate, his expression unreadable. A flicker of panic ran through me, but I pushed it down. I opened my mouth to speak, to explain why I had gathered everyone together, and that was when he finally looked up. "What?" he said sharply. The word cut through the room like a blade. I froze, confused, my thoughts scrambling to catch up. Before I could say anything else, he leaned back in his chair, his voice calm and cold in a way I had never heard before. He said he knew exactly what I was about to do, and that he needed to stop me before I embarrassed myself further. The silence that followed was absolute. I could feel every pair of eyes moving between us, the air thick with confusion and disbelief. I watched his mother's face drain of color. I saw his father straighten in his chair, clearly ready to intervene, before my mother instinctively reached out and grabbed his arm, silently asking him not to. "I don't want to marry you," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I deserve someone better, someone who's going somewhere. You're comfortable, but comfortable isn't enough." The words didn't register all at once. They came in waves, each one hitting harder than the last. I felt heat rush to my face, my hands trembling at my sides. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I glanced around the table, desperate for something grounding, and that's when I saw them. His friends, smirking. One of them whispered something to another, and they struggled to hold back laughter. His cousins wore expressions that looked almost satisfied, like this was a scene they had been anticipating. 3 years collapsed in an instant. 3 years of love, of patience, of believing we were moving toward the same future. I stood there, the ring still hidden in my purse, the proposal dying before it ever had a chance to exist. The smart thing would have been to sit down, to retreat, to protect myself in silence. But something inside me snapped, clean and sudden. I took a slow breath, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Noted," I said calmly. I reached into my purse, pulled out the ring box, looked at it for a brief second, and placed it back inside. Then I looked up at him, at his friends, at the room full of people who had just witnessed my humiliation. I told them that I would be throwing a thank God I escaped party that night, and that everyone there was invited except him and the people who had just shown me exactly who they were. The smirks vanished instantly. Before anyone could recover, I continued, my voice still calm, still controlled, and told him that since we were being honest in front of everyone, I knew about his coworker, the one he'd been texting constantly, the one he had dinner with on Tuesday when he told me he was working late. I mentioned the wine bar downtown, the laughing, the hands held under the table, the photo my friend had sent me days earlier. His face shifted from cold to panicked in seconds. His mother gasped. His father stood up. He tried to interrupt, to explain, but I stopped him. I told him I had planned to give him the benefit of the doubt, to confront him privately, but he had made his priorities painfully clear. I thanked him for saving me from the biggest mistake of my life. Then I told everyone brunch was paid for, that they were welcome to stay and enjoy it, and that I was leaving. I walked out without looking back, hearing his voice call after me, hearing his father yell, hearing his mother cry. I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I didn't let anyone see me break. The moment the restaurant doors closed behind me, the strength I had been holding on to cracked. Not all at once, not in a dramatic collapse, but in a quiet, suffocating way that made it hard to breathe. I walked to my car on autopilot, my hands shaking as I unlocked the door and slid into the driver's seat. I didn't start the engine. I just sat there, staring straight ahead, my mind blank, my body buzzing like it didn't know where to put all the shock. For nearly 20 minutes, I didn't move. My phone vibrated nonstop in my purse, but I couldn't bring myself to look. I knew who it was. His name. My mother. my sister, friends who had already heard pieces of what happened. I wasn't ready to explain myself. I wasn't ready to hear sympathy or questions or anger on my behalf. I needed silence, even though the silence hurt. When I finally drove home, the streets felt unreal, like I was watching the world through glass. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt familiar anymore. I pulled into my driveway, turned off the car, and sat there again, longer this time, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. Inside that house were 3 years of memories, pictures, clothes, gifts, a version of my life that no longer existed. I poured myself a drink as soon as I walked in, then another, not because I wanted to numb myself completely, but because the edge of the pain was too sharp to sit with sober. I opened my phone and started deleting photos. Vacation smiles, holiday dinners, random nights on the couch where I thought we were happy. Each swipe felt like ripping something out of my chest, but I didn't stop. I needed to see it gone. I needed proof that I wasn't clinging to a lie anymore. When my sister showed up a couple of hours later, letting herself in with the spare key my mother had given her, I barely looked up. She asked if I was okay, and the words that came out of my mouth surprised even me. I said I was great. I said I had just been publicly humiliated and discovered my boyfriend of 3 years had been emotionally cheating on me and that I was living the dream. The sarcasm fell flat, but she didn't push. She just sat down across from me, present, steady, letting me unravel at my own pace. She asked if I really meant what I said about the party. I told her yes, every word of it. I wasn't going to sit alone and spiral. I wasn't going to let that brunch be the last chapter of the day. If he thought he could humiliate me and walk away clean, he was wrong. I didn't want revenge. I wanted my dignity back. I wanted to be surrounded by people who actually cared about me. By 7 that evening, my house was full. Family, friends, people who had shown up without asking questions or taking sides. We ordered food, played music, talked about everything except him, until eventually, naturally, we talked about him anyway. I laughed more than I thought I could, not because it didn't hurt, but because laughter reminded me that I still existed outside of that relationship. Around 9, my phone started ringing again. His name lit up the screen. I ignored it. Then again, and again. On the 4th call, I answered, my voice calm in a way I didn't feel. He said we needed to talk. I told him we didn't. He accused me of embarrassing him by calling him out in public. I told him I hadn't accused him of anything. I had stated a fact. Friends don't hold hands under tables at wine bars. Friends don't text at 2 in the morning. Friends don't hide. He said I was being dramatic. I told him rejecting a proposal that hadn't even happened just to humiliate me in front of his friends wasn't dramatic. It was cruel. He said he panicked. I told him that panic doesn't make someone plan humiliation, and that his friend's smirks told me everything I needed to know. When he finally went quiet, I said goodbye, blocked his number, and went back to the people who had chosen me without hesitation. That night didn't heal me, but it stopped the bleeding. And sometimes that's enough to survive the first wave. The days that followed didn't calm down the way I hoped they would. Instead, everything seemed to spread outward, like ripples I couldn't control. By the next morning, messages were waiting for me the moment I opened my eyes. Some were kind, full of concern and quiet support. Others were uncomfortable, asking questions that felt more like judgments disguised as curiosity. Word travels fast when families overlap and social circles collide, and by Monday, the story had taken on a life of its own. At work, people looked at me differently. A few coworkers asked if I was okay before I even reached my desk. My manager pulled me aside and gently offered me time off if I needed it. I said I was fine, even though that word felt hollow in my mouth. I didn't want to retreat. I didn't want him to take anything else from me. So I focused on tasks, on emails, on pretending that my heart wasn't still bruised and tender beneath the surface. His family reached out in pieces. His mother texted first, apologizing over and over, saying she was devastated by what had happened and that she didn't raise her son to treat someone that way. I responded politely, respectfully, making it clear that while I appreciated her kindness, there was no path back for me. I needed boundaries, even with people who meant well. His father called a few days later, his voice heavy with disappointment. He told me he was ashamed, that he had seen the way I treated their family and the effort I had made over the years. Hearing that helped more than I expected. It didn't fix anything, but it reminded me that I hadn't imagined the good parts of myself. His friends were another story. One of them, the same woman who had been smirking at brunch, reached out to me through social media, saying she felt terrible and wanted to talk. Against my better judgment, I responded. She claimed they didn't know he was going to humiliate me like that they thought he was planning to break up with me privately afterward. The words made my stomach twist. I asked her if she thought it was normal to attend a family brunch knowing someone was about to be dumped. She didn't have a good answer. She said he had been unhappy for a while, that he felt trapped, and that they were just supporting their friend. Supporting him, I realized, had meant dehumanizing me. As mutual friends began choosing sides, the noise grew louder. Some people said I was too harsh for exposing his coworker in public. Others said he deserved every word. I stayed mostly silent, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I was learning that not every narrative needed my participation. I started to understand that escalation didn't always mean yelling or fighting back. Sometimes it meant standing firm and letting other people reveal themselves. Inside, though, things were shifting. I wasn't just hurt anymore, I was changing. The shock was wearing off, replaced by clarity. I began to see how often I had minimized myself to keep the peace, how often I had swallowed discomfort to avoid conflict. I thought about all the moments I had felt small and brushed them aside in the name of love. That realization was uncomfortable, but it was also empowering. By the end of the week, I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me. Family expectations, public opinions, his attempts through others to soften what he had done. It was all too much, and I could feel myself nearing a breaking point. I knew something had to give. I just didn't know yet whether that breaking point would destroy me or finally force me to let go of the version of myself that kept accepting less than I deserved. The lowest point didn't come with shouting or confrontation. It came quietly, late at night, when the world finally stopped demanding things from me, and I was left alone with my thoughts. The house felt too big then, every room echoing with memories I hadn't yet learned how to release. I would lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying moments from the past 3 years, and wondering how I hadn't seen what was right in front of me. That was when the doubts crept in. Not doubts about him, but about myself. I questioned every decision I had made, every compromise I had justified. I wondered if I really had been too comfortable, too steady, too predictable. I wondered if loving him the way I did had somehow made me smaller. Those thoughts were the most dangerous because they felt logical in the dark, even though they weren't true. One night, I found myself sitting on the floor of my closet, surrounded by half-packed boxes I had started and abandoned earlier that day. His things were still mixed in with mine, a jacket he left behind, a pair of shoes he never bothered to take back. I held one of his shirts in my hands and felt the weight of grief settle fully into my chest. Not just grief for the relationship, but for the future I had imagined so vividly. The wedding conversations, the shared routines, the quiet belief that I had finally chosen right. I cried then, not softly, not gracefully, but in deep, shaking breaths that left me exhausted. I cried for the humiliation of that brunch, for the way his friends had smirked, for the realization that parts of that moment had likely been discussed and anticipated without me. I cried because being strong in public had come at the cost of breaking in private. I cried because it hurt to accept that someone I trusted could look me in the eye and decide I was disposable. In those moments, I felt painfully alone, even though I wasn't. My family checked in, friends texted, but there is a specific kind of loneliness that comes from having your reality shattered by the person you trusted most. It makes you feel untethered, like you don't quite belong anywhere anymore. I questioned whether walking away with dignity had actually cost me closure. I wondered if silence was strength or avoidance. By the end of that week, I reached an emotional bottom. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even actively sad. I felt hollow, drained, unsure of who I was outside of the life I had planned. And in that emptiness, I realized something had to change. I couldn't stay in this place. I couldn't keep circling the same pain. Either I would let this moment define me, or I would find a way to use it as the line where everything shifted. I just didn't know yet how to make that shift. The shift didn't happen all at once. It wasn't a dramatic revelation or a sudden surge of confidence. It came quietly, through a series of moments that forced me to see the truth without the filter of grief or longing. The first came from an unexpected place. Late one afternoon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another well-meaning attempt to mediate something that no longer needed fixing. But something told me to answer. It was his father. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. His voice was heavy, controlled, like someone choosing each word carefully. He told me he wanted to apologize, not just for what happened at the brunch, but for everything that had followed. He said he had seen the way I had carried myself over the past 3 years, how I had treated their family with respect and consistency, and how I had shown up even when things weren't convenient. He said what his son did was unacceptable and that he had made that very clear to him. Hearing that cracked something open inside me, not because I needed validation from his family, but because it confirmed what I had been slowly realizing on my own. I hadn't imagined my effort. I hadn't exaggerated my loyalty. I hadn't been foolish for believing in the future we talked about. I had shown up honestly. He hadn't. A couple of days later, another message arrived, this time from the coworker, the man whose name I had spoken out loud at that brunch. He said he wanted to clear the air, that nothing physical had ever happened between them. He said they were just friends, that she talked about me often, that she cared about me, but got scared about marriage. I read his words over and over, noticing how carefully they were phrased, how they tried to soften the truth without fully denying it. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to investigate further. It didn't matter whether the betrayal had crossed a physical line or not. Emotional distance, secrecy, and disrespect had already done the damage. He had checked out of our relationship long before he stood up and humiliated me in front of our families. Understanding that gave me clarity instead of pain. I realized I didn't need more answers. I already had enough. That was the moment I chose myself, fully and without hesitation. I stopped replaying conversations in my head. I stopped wondering what I could have done differently. I accepted that someone else's inability to value me did not diminish my worth. I packed the rest of his things into boxes, not with anger, but with finality. I put the ring in a safe place, not as a symbol of loss, but as proof that I had walked away with my dignity intact. For the first time since that Sunday, I felt steady again. Not healed, not untouched, but grounded. I understood that walking away wasn't weakness, it was power, and I was finally ready to let the consequences fall where they belonged. Once I stopped engaging, everything else seemed to unravel on its own. I didn't have to explain myself or defend my actions. The truth had already been set in motion, and it moved faster without my interference. Mutual friends started to distance themselves from him, not dramatically, but noticeably. Invitations stopped coming. Conversations grew awkward. People who had once laughed easily around him now hesitated, unsure of where they stood. Reputation, I learned, doesn't collapse in a single moment. It erodes quietly when patterns finally become impossible to ignore. His family felt it too. His mother stopped reaching out after one final message wishing me well, the kind of goodbye that carries both apology and resignation. His father, who had always been steady, made it clear to him that actions have consequences, especially when they hurt someone who had been welcomed into their family as their own. I wasn't there to witness those conversations, but I could feel the shift. The safety net he had taken for granted was no longer unquestioned. Through friends, I heard pieces of what followed. He tried to justify himself, saying he panicked, saying he felt pressured, saying things spiraled out of control. The explanation sounded hollow, especially to people who had watched me invest 3 years of consistency and care. Some defended him at first, but even that support thinned over time. It's hard to maintain a narrative when it doesn't align with reality. About 2 weeks after the brunch, I found out through the same quiet channels that he and the coworker had started dating officially. The information didn't hurt the way I thought it would. If anything, it confirmed what I already knew. Whatever line they claimed they hadn't crossed before didn't matter anymore. He had chosen distraction over honesty, excitement over respect. That was his pattern to own now, not my burden to carry. His friends posted vague messages online about knowing your worth and not settling. I noticed how carefully they avoided specifics, how those posts were meant to rewrite the story without actually addressing it. I found it almost ironic. They framed it like he had escaped something, when in reality, he had walked away from someone who loved him, supported him, and believed in a shared future. Meanwhile, my life was slowly regaining its shape. My family showed up in ways that reminded me I wasn't alone. My mother called every few days just to check in, never pushing, never asking me to feel better before I was ready. My sister made plans with me, small ones, simple ones, like reminding me that joy doesn't need to be loud to be real. My father, who rarely spoke about emotions, told me he was proud of how I handled everything. That meant more than he probably realized. I didn't seek revenge. I didn't correct rumors. I didn't post my own version of events online. I walked away calmly, and that seemed to unsettle him more than any confrontation ever could have. While his world grew smaller and more complicated, mine became quieter, steadier, and more honest. For the first time, the fallout wasn't mine to survive. It was his to face. 6 weeks after that brunch, the chaos finally settled enough for me to hear myself think again. Time didn't erase what happened, but it softened the sharpest edges of it. I had space to feel everything without being overwhelmed by it, to be angry one day and calm the next without judging myself for either. Healing, I learned, isn't linear. It moves forward, then sideways, then forward again, until one day you realize you're standing on steadier ground than you were before. He tried to reach out a few more times, once through a number I didn't recognize, once through a mutual friend who thought reconciliation might bring closure. I shut it down every time. I wasn't interested in reopening a conversation that had already shown me everything I needed to know. The way someone treats you when they feel powerful tells you far more than how they treat you when things are easy. He showed me who he was when it mattered most, and that clarity was something I refused to give back. I went on a date a few weeks later, nothing serious, just coffee with someone I met through a friend. There were no games, no performances, no undercurrents of tension. It was simple, and for the first time in a long while, that simplicity felt refreshing rather than boring. I wasn't ready to build anything new yet, but it reminded me that connection doesn't have to come with anxiety. There are good people out there who don't need to tear you down to feel important. The ring stayed in a safe place, tucked away not as a symbol of loss, but as a reminder of a decision I made for myself. One day, I'll sell it. I'll use the money for something that brings me joy, a trip, an experience, a memory that belongs only to me. I'm glad I didn't make a spectacle of it that day. Walking away with my dignity intact was the most powerful choice I could have made. When people ask me now if I would ever take him back, my answer is simple and unwavering. No. Not because I hate him, and not because I need to punish him, but because I respect myself too much to return to someone who showed me cruelty when honesty would have been enough. Love without respect isn't love, it's endurance. And I'm no longer interested in surviving relationships that require me to shrink. That night, the Thank God I Escaped party wasn't about celebration. It was about being seen, about being reminded that one person's failure to recognize your worth does not define it. I carry that lesson with me now, quietly, confidently. Some chapters don't end with closure, they end with clarity, and that, I've learned, is more than enough.